All right, let's take a look at some basic measurements, they're also called central tendencies, that we often use or encounter when we're dealing with statistics. I've got them listed down here: mean, median, and mode. Those are our central tendencies, and the range is also a helpful value in interpreting these numbers. Now, before we jump into the actual calculations, let's remind ourselves of something you've probably seen before at various times. I want to make sure we all understand what it represents. This is called a stem and leaf plot. Now, a stem and leaf plot, anytime you see one, it should always have a key with it, something that describes what these numbers really represent. This is just a way of organizing data so we don't have to list it all out. What you would probably see is something like this, 7-3. Okay? And you see something like that that says 73. That gives us some meaning. What it means is anytime we see a number here, basically represents the tens place, and every number over here represents the ones place. So this number that I just circled is actually 73. And if you saw 7-4, then it's going to be 74. So each one of the numbers on the leaf side represents a different data point. So just in case you were unfamiliar with these plots, once you realize that, they're not that difficult to sort through. Now let's look at how we find some of these measurements when we're looking at it in this context. Let's start with some of the easy ones. For example, I think one of the easiest things to find is the range. All we got to do is look to see what the span is. What's the highest number up here and the lowest number, and subtract them. Okay? My highest number is right there. That's 98. And my lowest number is right here. That's 55. And if I subtract 98 minus 55, I'm going to get an answer of 43. And 43 would be my range. It basically is telling me over what span does all my data exist. And there's uses for it we'll get into later on, things you can interpret with that range value, like consistency. But right now, we'll just go through how to find it mathematically. Another easy thing to recognize from this would be mode. And mode basically means the most frequent, or what repeats itself the most. Now, just so you're aware, mode is kind of a funny thing. You could have more than one mode, or you could have a data set that doesn't have a single mode at all. Maybe nothing ever repeated. You just have to look at the data set and see what's there. What I noticed right from the beginning is I got 3 of these 4s. Now, they don't really mean 4, they mean 74. And nothing else happens that often. Yeah, there's a couple of 93s, and there's a couple of 86s, but none of those happen 3 times like the 74. So my most frequent is 74. Now those two are kind of things you just sort of identify. They don't take a ton of math to figure out. Another one that we can just kind of identify here is what's called the median. Now the median is really the middle data point. It doesn't mean it's exactly halfway numerically. It doesn't mean it's exactly halfway between 98 and 55. We're not talking about what the average is. We're just talking about which data point has just as many data points on the left as it does on the right, or above as it does below. So to find this, we just start crossing off from both sides. I'll take my lowest, which is 55, and my highest, which is 98, and I'll get rid of it. And then I'll go to my next lowest, which is 68, 93. And you can see the pattern here. 69, 93, 73, 91, 74, 90. And I just keep crossing out the highest and the lowest, highest and the lowest. 74, 89, 74, 86, 81, 86, 82, 85. And I'm left with that right there, which really means 84. Now, as a side note, if you ever are finding the median and you end up with 2 numbers left here in the middle to cross out, well, your median actually isn't a data point in this particular set. You would want to find out what's halfway between those 2 numbers if there were 2 left over. It really depends on how big your data set is, how many numbers you have within it. So there's the median. That's another central tendency that comes into play quite a bit later on. The mean, this is what everybody thinks of when they hear the word average. Okay, but the statistical name is mean because there are a lot of statistical averages you're unfamiliar with at this point that you could use to interpret something. Right now we're just going to worry about what most people think of as an average. So in order to do this problem, I'm going to do a little bit of math. And what I do is I have to take each data point, 55 plus 68 plus 69, and keep adding them all up until I get to the very last one, 98. And then I'm going to divide that by how many data points there are. If you count up every one of these data points, you'll find that there are 19 of them. So this one's kind of a messy calculation. It doesn't happen real easy. What you got to make sure you do, especially if you're using a calculator, is to add everything on the top as one big number and then divide it. If you're going to do it all at one shot, you might need to put parentheses in there. Otherwise, the calculator is not going to tell you what you expect it to. This becomes 1,545. That's how much all of these things up here added together became, divided by 19 total measurements, and I get a mean of 81.31. So if I was ever given a question that said, which of the central tendencies is the greatest, I would look at mean, median, and mode. Those are my 3 central tendencies, and say which one of these is biggest. But I had to do some analysis first. I couldn't just look right up here at this graph and assume I could pinpoint it just by looking at it. So if I look at these, see which one's the greatest, I'd have to go with the median in this case. And in future lessons, we'll get into what those things mean and how you can use different measurements, whether it's the mean, the median, or the mode, to make a data set sort of appear the way you want it to appear without really lying about anything. You just kind of change what people are focusing on. So we'll get into the meaning of this down the road. This is the nuts and bolts of how to deal with central tendencies, statistical measurements.